Okay, here we go. We are beginning chapter 19. Okay, so this is our first class after Pesach. For the people online, they're not seeing that there's a break between chapters 18 and 19, but we do have a break. So we are starting up again. Now, in chapter 18, as we know, we started a whole new topic, which is, it's hard. Up until chapter 17, we talked about this tremendous approach, the holistic approach to being a Beinani. The holistic approach sounds something like this. Learn about God, meditate about God, have the meditation influence my emotions, love God, fear God, do Torah mitzvahs all day long, in terms of my thought, speech, and my action. That's what it sounded like. Along comes chapter 18 and says, you know what? That's great, but not everyone has the ability to sit and to focus and to meditate for, let's say, even 5 minutes, let alone for an extended period of time. So what about that guy? It says, it's very close to every single one of us. So if it's very close to every single one of us, so there's something missing here. What's going on? So the Alter Rebbe began in chapter 18 by explaining to us that really there's a different method as well. Up until chapter 18, we've been discussing the idea of creating an emotion, right? Through our intellectual approach, we're going to develop an emotion. Chapter 18 comes along and says, you know what? Actually, within the person himself, he already has a hidden love for Hashem. And really what he needs to do is uncover that hidden love. In other words, it's natural by all of us. It's just that our nefesh abahamis, our animal souls, are covering over it. And in them covering over it, sometimes we forget, sometimes we don't see, sometimes we are not as into it. But if we could sort of remove the mud from here and the pebbles from here and the rocks from here and etc., 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 we will somehow be able to uncover our natural trait of being totally in love with Hashem. That's the objective. So he said there are 4 questions that we brought up in chapter 18 that we said we have to answer. We answered 2 already, and now we have to answer the second 2. Okay? The question that we're going to start off answering in chapter 19 is, what is the style of this type of love? In other words, what is the direction? What is the kavanah? What is the intention? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What is it? What is it? That's what we have to discuss now. We already discussed how do we each have this. We talked about it as being an inheritance from our forefathers. We spoke about where in the soul it's found. We talked about the idea of chachma, right? We talked about that at the end of chapter 18. And what's left, if you want to look back in chapter 18, if you want to look on page 46, right? We said, if you look about 1/3 of the way down the page, the first word on the line is ma'avoseinu. We said, rak tzarich lahakdim levayer, to explain techila. First of all, beir heitev, a good explanation, the shirish of the ava, ve'inyana, it's inyan, meaning this is what we're going to be dealing with today, right? What does it look like? How is it? How does it come across? Eichi Yerushalanu, how this is an inheritance. And then finally, the last thing that we have to add is, how does it include yira? How does it include fear? Because we know the Zohar explains that love and fear are 2 wings to a bird. You can't have a bird flying with only one emotion. You need both emotions. So we still have to answer that question. But let's dive into the idea of, what does this love look like? How are you going to describe this love to me? Okay, Parak Yud Tes. Okay? L'chaim, l'chaim. V'letoisefes biur, an additional explanation. Tzarich levayir heitiv. We have to explain very well. Mashakatsuv, the pasuk says, Ner havaya nishmas adam. The candle of Hashem is the soul of man. Perush, what does that mean? She Yisrael hakruyim Adam. The Jewish people are called Adam. Nishmasam hi. Their souls are limashal kaor haner. We can compare their souls to the light of a candle. Shemisnaneya tamid lemaila. That is constantly flickering and going in a direction of upwards. Betivo, that's its nature. Top of the next page. Sha'or ha'esh chafetz beteva lifarid mehapesila v'lidabek v'shoyrasha lemaila b'yisoid ha'esh ha'klali shetachas gal ha'yareach. Okay. Kamashikasu be'etz chaim, as the Arizal explains. What do we know about a candle? What do we know about fire? We know that fire is constantly moving upwards. We say that we can hold the fire down. How do we hold the fire down? We keep it on a wick. When we have a wick, the fire is holding on to the wick on the one hand, but it's pulling up. It's constantly pulling up in this direction. So the question is, why is the nature of fire to pull up? So the Arizal explains that the nature of fire is to go up because that's where its source is. In Kabbalah, it explains that the source of fire is underneath, like it says over here, the planet of the moon. That's where it is. That's where it's going to Kabbalah. So what are we saying? We're saying that the fire, in its nature, wants to return back up to its source. That's the mashal. That's the comparison. That's what we're comparing it to. Afshal yidei yichave v'lo yayer klum lemata, v'gam lemayla b'shayrasho yizbatel oyru b'metzias b'shayrasho. An amazing concept. He says like this. You would imagine that with most things, it wants to travel to in a certain direction, to go to a certain place. Why? Because it's going to gain something on the deal, right? In other words, I want to go to Chicago. Why do I want to go to Chicago? I have a reason to go to Chicago. I have a business meeting in Chicago. I have friends to visit in Chicago. I am wanting to take a vacation in Chicago. There's a goal involved. That goal is what's suited for me. It's good for me. It's good for me to be in Chicago. So I'm going to figure out a way to get to Chicago. Or as we all know, we're always trying to go somewhere. We have this energy. Well, we got to go home. We got to go out. We got to do this. But there's always a goal for it. There's a reason why we're going somewhere. And usually the reason why we're going somewhere is in order to benefit the me-ness of me, so to speak. I think I just coined that word, right? What does it mean, the meanness? In other words, I want to go to Chicago because I want to visit my friends. And therefore, I'm going to have a great time in visiting my friends. I want to go to a business meeting. Why do I want a business meeting? Because I want to make a living. I want to make money. I want to be able to spend the money, whatever. I want to go to vacation. I think that going to Chicago is going to be a special place for me to go because I'm going to gain. It's always about me gaining something on the deal. What's unusual about this situation with the fire in our comparison is that what happens when the fire actually jumps off of the wick? Let's say it burns out the wick, or let's say, we have a lot of people on Shabbos, they have candles that are made out of with olive oil, and you have some olive oil and you have a floating wick on top, and you light the candle and it's burning and burning and burning and burning and burning, and all of a sudden all the oil gets sucked up, and then the fire, where does it go? It disappears. In its attempt to go back up to its source, it literally loses itself completely. It just disappears. You don't see it, not here below, and you certainly don't see it above. So what does it gain by returning to its source? It's not going back to see old friends. It's not going on vacation. It's not that we have a museum of Shabbos candles, up in Shemayim somewhere. No, it loses itself completely. But yet that's its nature. The nature of the fire is to return back to its source for nothing that it's going to get for itself, just because its nature is to return back to its place of where it comes from. And in fact, it totally becomes what we call, as he says here, Yisbatel Oiro B'Mitzias. The light will become totally nullified out of its form, to the point that you don't see it anymore. It goes back up to its shayrish, it goes back up to b'shayrasho, to its root, and then there is nothing left of this fire. There's nothing left of this light. We don't have it anymore. Finished. However, even though it's seemingly not getting anything on the deal, it's just returning back up to its source, back up to where it comes from. Nevertheless, that is the chafetz, the desire. And we learned this earlier in Tanya. A desire, when it uses the word chafetz, means that it's a wanting with a pleasure involved. That is the ultimate pleasure of the fire. That's what it wants more than anything else. To just become part of and one with its source. And that's it. So now, why is it that the soul is compared to a fire? So, kach nishmas ha'adam, in the same way, the soul of each one of us, really, its nature is what? It wants to return back to its source. That's what it wants to do. It doesn't want to be down here. Its nature is, it wants Hashem, it wants God. That's what its nature is. It's being held down. It's being pulled down. If it goes out of the body, it'll become a non-entity, so to speak. It's okay. That's the nature. It's not looking to be an entity. It's looking to go back up to its source. And that's what he says, Kach nishmas ha'adam, v'chein bechinas ruach v'nefesh. And not just the level of, like it says, the nishmas ha'adam, right? Because we know that we generally speak about 3 different levels of the soul that are around the body, are included in the body. We talk about a nefesh, a higher level is a ruach, and a higher level than that is a neshama. It's not just the higher level, the neshama, but it's even the ruach and even the nefesh. That is the makeup. That is the actual DNA of the soul. That's the makeup of the soul. Its ultimate, its inner desire, its inner will, its nature is that it wants to separate and to go out of the body. And to become cleaving, become completely one with its root, with its source. Hashem chayei chayim baruch hu. With Hashem, the life of all life. That's really what we're all about. Hagam shetieh ayin ve'efes. Even though at that place the soul is going to become a non-entity, it's going to become ayin ve'efes, right? V'tizbatel sham b'mitzias lagamrei, and it's going to become nullified out of its form over there. V'lo yishayir mimenu ma'uma, and nothing is going to be left of it. Mimahusa v'atzmusa arishon, from where it was before, its original place, its original being. It's not going to look like the way I look now. Nevertheless, this is the rotzen, the chafetz, right? Not just the will, a regular will, but a will with a pleasure in its nature. Now, why do we call it its nature? V'teva zehu shem hamushel. nature, when we call it its nature, we say that's a borrowed term. L'kol davar she'eino bebechinas tam v'das. So why do we call something that's its nature? We say, look, that's the nature. Why does the salmon want to swim upstream? After all these years that it's in the ocean, then it comes back to some random river in the middle of Alaska. That's the nature. Why do we say that? Because the nature of something is not an intellectual decision that the entity is making. It's not that I am sitting here and saying, you know what, this is really in my best interest. My best interest is to return back to its source. That's not what we're saying at all. By definition, nature means it's not an intellectual decision. It's something that just is imprinted in me, that's who I am. Why? Because that's the way God made me. You could say that, like we said back in the second chapter of Tanya. That's just what my soul is. However, when it's down here in my body, so it's covered over by an animal soul, and it's covered over by a physical body, and it's being stuck in here, okay. But really, what's the nature? The real nature of my godly soul is that I want to cleave back up to, back home. I want to go back home. I want to go back to where I'm from. I'm not interested in being here. What am I doing here? Right? I can't experience it right now because I'm totally immersed in being in this world. But really, if you were to scratch the surface and get back to it, so then I can't be anything else. And that's what he says here. There's no tam v'das in this. V'seichel musag v'muvan, an intellect that is like grasped or understood. Ella l'mayla, it's above midas v'seichel. It's above my intellect. It's above my mind. Hamusag v'muvan v'hi b'chinas chachma shebenefesh sheba orein so baruch hu. So where is it coming from? Like we said at the end of chapter 18, that is my chachma. The chachma we said is that the one place in me that the Eibishter is able to dwell. Because why? Because the chachma is not enough of a something. It's not limited enough, right, for it to be a limited entity. It is open enough to be able to be a kli for Hashem to dwell in me. So Hashem is dwelling in this aspect of me. That's what's happening. And so that is the impression, the nature that I have on my soul. Okay? So with this in mind, you could say, but what's the point? It's not about a point. It's not about a reason. It's not an intellect. It's not an idea. It is what it is. That is the nature of my soul. The nature of my soul is that it wants to return back up to Shemayim, back up to heaven, back up to God. Why? Because that's the DNA. The same reason why you're going to ask, why does a salmon choose to go and go to this particular river and not a different river, or even to go to a river Bechlal and is having a great time in the ocean? Why does it have to go to any river? It's been coded in the salmon that this is what it needs to do. And if you would have an interview with a salmon, Kaviyachol, it would say to you, I don't even know why. I don't know why I'm coming to this particular river and not that river. I don't know why I'm going to any river. Why do I have to go to a river for? It just does it. It's just the way it is. So that's the nature of the soul. The nature of the soul is that is just the way it is. That's who we are. Okay, now, we have to build on this. But somehow this is going to get me back to where we started chapter 18, which is, how do I tap into this energy? How do I tap into this energy to do what? To control my thought, speech, and action. In my voyage, in my journey of being a Beinoni. This, if you look at it from a more of a general idea, we could see now that this is a very different discussion than what the discussion that we had in chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, etc. Over there, we were talking about a journey that implies how you're going to build something. Over here, we're not building anything. Over here, now we're going back to the brass tacks of what I am. And if I could recognize what I am, and I could take a look at this inherent superpower that I have inside of myself and somehow capture it, it should, and this is what the Alter Rebbe is trying to tell us, it will be able to win out over my nefesh habahamis at any given point in time. Okay? That's the goal. So now we have to see how this is going to develop. Okay, let's stop here for today. We'll continue.